Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here and joining this live interview with one of our online residents. As you already know, we have these sessions for talking and present their work. We will have a conversation, a little discussion, so please, everyone can join at any moment. Also, this video will be recorded and updated in our social media, YouTube and Instagram, so you can find us there. And also a note that our guest today will be presenting her work also in Instagram during the weekend, so please catch up there. And that's it, my introduction. I will leave the floor to you to take us to your presentation.
Okay, I'll bring it up.
Talk after that.
I'm going to bring it up, okay. Hello, everyone, and thanks very much, Laura, and thank everybody from GLOGAR for giving me this opportunity to present some of my work. I'm going to try and keep it within the 20 minutes. So it's kind of an introduction, a little bit about my practice, and also the last part, a little bit about what I've been doing on the residency, on the virtual residency. So my name is Sinéad Aldridge, and I'm from Ireland. I was born in Belfast, and I've been working in Berlin maybe over the last 10 years. And I've maintained a practice mainly in painting over the last 3 decades, which is quite frightening sometimes when you think about it. I've shown my work in solo and group exhibitions in Ireland, in the UK, and in Europe. And my work is held in public and private collections with a variety of essays and also a few publications. And I just want to highlight this particular exhibition because it brings together 8 contemporary painters, women painters from North and South of Ireland. And it's it was a wonderful exhibition, but unfortunately it had been hit by the pandemic, closed down, opened up, like so many exhibitions and what we've experienced through the pandemic. But there's a wonderful publication, and if anybody wants to contact me with regard to the essay, it's actually really, really good in relation to Irish contemporary female painters. So this is the shot of my studio around the beginning of beginning of this year, actually. So you can actually see maybe, you know, it's about painting. You can also see a sense of scale here. So we've got small scale, we've got works on paper, and also medium-sized canvases. I would have said that my work is primarily small in scale. Up until maybe halfway through the pandemic, I wanted to kind of grow larger and such, so that's kind of interesting. But I think it's talking about scale, which is defined as small scale, domestic. I think that's something that we could talk about later, you know, because I think it's a curatorial issue. I think in caring for the work regardless of what its scale, because sometimes when they look at small scale they might say, oh, there's lack of ambition here. So I kind of would like that to come up maybe in our discussion later. So painting, for me, I think there's no single answer to what painting is today, and I've been immersed in mark making, in the process of mark making and the materiality of paint for quite a number of years. So it seemingly can be viewed as cordoned off or kind of secluded in the studio. And I picked up this quote from Barry Swabsky, the art critic, that I really, really enjoy. I mean, he says that painting calls upon the viewer to act as an interactive co-extender of the work. And I kind of really like that idea because it's bringing the work from inside, bringing it out. And there's this kind of circular approach to the making of the art. You know, I'm there, I'm making the art. There's a series of dipping and diving into memory, working on the surface, doing lots of things, playing lots of things that people do not see, or maybe they do. I mean, and that's the very interesting thing about it. So my work draws upon the extensive historical pool of the history of painting, but it also wants to expand and subvert and also create new interpretations in contemporary painting practice. So that's where I would locate myself. So in this section, I just want to talk about a little bit about some of the paintings that I've created during the pandemic. I don't think it will be, you know, the scope of the talk wouldn't give for talking about a wider number of years. So I'd like to highlight two things. The first thing being gesture, and the second being the housing, or what you would call the framing of the gesture. And I'm going to show the aspects that the pandemic paintings have kind of illustrated in terms of mark making, or a search towards mark making. So this was a carrier series, and there's about 12 of them that to some extent created themselves, because they started really at the beginning of the lockdown. I was fortunate enough to fall within the 5-mile radius, so I could cycle into the studio, and so many of my colleagues couldn't. So they had to adapt new ways of actually working. I have to say that the studio was a haven at the time. But what became obvious at the beginning of the pandemic was the urgency of the mark that was being laid out onto the surface. I didn't want to control anything or censor anything here. I just made sure that I had a lot of surfaces to work on, but I kept the scale consistent. So what you see is a lot of layering, a lot of scraping back, a lot of building up, a lot of congestion. And then what kind of started to kind of form were these bulbous head-like forms, small figurative things that were pushing out from the canvas, and also almost weighted down, and you know, there's a precariousness, like leg-like forms. And then, you know, moving through the pandemic and my kind of feeling and reaction and working through this, what happened was there was a series of paintings that I called Drift or Drifter. And you can look at the mark and see the difference in the mark. This is a kind of figurative form that's no longer in an interior. It's outside, or it's wandering outside. But the pace of the mark is slower. I think it's almost hovering in parts. It's quite loose. And I mean, I'm thinking of how I felt at that time. We were like in a no man's land at that time. We didn't know where we were going during the pandemic. So there's this kind of, you know, beginning urgency, panic, and then kind of we're filtered into this kind of wasteland area almost. At the end of 2020, I kind of decided that I wanted to open up the mark making aspect. Well, maybe it was getting too congested. So this isn't anything new. When I'm working on paper, I've worked on paper for years. But what I decided to do was to deliberately kind of open it up in a sense that I wanted one mark, I wanted one color, and I almost wanted one layer. And I wanted the mark to be like a continuous mark. And the gesso ground on the paper just allowed me to kind of, it kind of illuminated this olive green that I found, which I kind of kept with that. I obviously tried other colors, but it was something about this kind of luminosity within the green that I stayed with. So it was almost kind of trying to create at that time with the single gesture, it was almost trying to create some sort of calligraphic alphabet for myself, in other words. So there were lots of these that were made, and then what started to happen was this small series, which I think are quite successful. They started to kind of form, into that something that could be seen as a series, and I just called them small gesture series. And here what you see is kind of huddled forms, flaying arms. These aren't singular figures like maybe in the paintings that I've showed you before. And that's what I find quite interesting. Also, these works are actually shown. They're in a touring exhibition at the moment. They've just gone from Wales over to Japan, and they're going over to the US later. In hindsight, and this has some sort of connection with the second part of what I'm talking about, I realized that possibly some of those huddled forms, some of that small gesture series had some sort of connection with this presentation that I've seen. It's a wonderful presentation. These small alabaster figures, almost maybe about 30, maybe more, they stand at about 22, 25 centimeters. The way they were presented in an upper room in the Bode Museum was remarkable. I really, it freed them almost, because normally they're encased under these arches within the tomb. And I think this was the second time that they were brought out of their location in Dijon in France. So also they were at eye level and you could walk around. They seemed incredibly fragile, you know, when you were looking at them, but there was this repetitiveness moving in and out, the sense of mourning, and, you know, this kind of connects in some way with what was going on in the pandemic, how we were collectively feeling, I think, also, and maybe, you know, at the result of where I want to go in my residency research. Another attempt, what I kind of mentioned at the beginning, was trying to frame the smaller gesture and open it out. I have worked in like a handmade geometric kind of form on the canvas, you know, using that. But what I just did in the studio, quite intuitively, I didn't kind of bring this up in a computer or anything. I just got masking tape and kind of created and stopped and thought, yeah, that's kind of interesting as a grid to lay stuff on, to lay this kind of wet fluidness on this hard ground. So this kind of brings me to the research at Glogau, and we have mourning women here. And so my research is really focusing on the depiction of mourning, death, and the representation of women, usually found in scenes from the Passion. And as a starting point, I decided to select specific artifacts and paintings from two state collections, the Bode Museum and also the Gemälden Gallery in Berlin. I kind of know these collections relatively well. I like, and I had this experience when I was living in London. You go to a collection, you walk into certain rooms, you have a look around, and sometimes you just go to specific artworks. So I kind of I knew these pieces before, but this is kind of a novel approach in terms of research to kind of look at these pieces with a specific idea in mind. So my interest here is really the repetition of gesture and expression, the folds in drapery in paintings from Roger van der Weyden. This will be later. I mean, I think the scope of what I'm doing in the research is kind of going to go beyond the residency period. And I kind of want this to allow me in some way to look at elements of presentation for my work and, you know, something that will support or promote a new interpretation of my painting practice. And I love this when I found this in a book by, what's her name? Iris Calden Rottenfeld. It's a lovely book. It kind of shows that this small artifact is part of a much bigger picture, or the bigger picture, that being the crucifixion that we're all kind of aware of. But I kind of want to locate this piece, this smaller fragment, and I actually want to hone in on it and kind of look at aspects that may be overlooked, okay? I mean, I'm going to be asking questions, who are these women? You know, what is the relationship to this? You know, we could have a longer discussion in terms of women today, you know, in terms of religion or whatever. I don't want the work to be seen or, you know, to be highly religious, because it's not. It's really about the painting and my responses to it. But also I want to kind of talk just a little bit about the Bode Museum, because I think they're shifting the ground in the way they're presenting their collection. And I find that really exciting. They obviously want to bring it to a contemporary audience. They have these artifacts. And I have to say that my experience of looking at these artifacts, you know, it's kind of a wonderful thing. And I really like when someone changes the dials, changes the climate, and suddenly kind of, let's shift this, like, let's give this different meaning. Let's engage with people today, you know. So there's an idea of presence that for me and for work and looking at work, that's really important. And that's the journey that you make and you standing in front of these works. And I think that's kind of part of my work and part of what I do. I mean, like I can remember going on, it was kind of like a pilgrimage to see Grunewald's Crucifixion when I was on residency back in the 80s in Germany. And, you know, looking at that amazing piece, which you only see in reproduction, but the journey towards that and actually seeing that, and then possibly going back again and the shifts and the differences in your work and your practice, whatever. So I find that really interesting. So here I am, I'm testing ideas. I kind of did a quick sketch in front of it. It's just a quick sketch. It's nothing kind of brilliant. But I do want to kind of go back and maybe I want to do more sketches. You know, I've done a few, but they're not kind of working properly. So that's something kind of I have a play with a little bit. But I've got the sketchbook in front of me. I'm sitting looking at it. It's totally different focus. And then I kind of bring it back, and I'm quite intuitive as a painter. So, you know, I'm kind of lifting up, working with mark here in oil and also pencil. And the pencil just happened. And it's kind of the interesting part of that, the mark making, the layering, whatever's going on there. But this line kind of drew up kind of the connectedness between these two women. Who are they? You know, are they mother and daughter? Are they two sisters? You know, what's going on here? Also, you know, it also could kind of be translated into something that's more musical, and this idea of the harp. I find it a little bit kitsch. I'm not sure where I would go with this, but I could see possibly that this could be a small wooden form, quite abstract. And the interesting thing about these wooden wind harps is they're usually put in an open window, and they're quite delicate. They just kind of, the wind just shimmers through with the sound, you know, and it depends on the way that they're strung, but they're quite simple instruments. So it could be something that could extend later. Also with just that line, I mean, it could be her, it could be thought, all those things. And this is another sketch from the first day when I kind of went back to the collection with the idea of research in mind. This is the Death of the Virgin, and what I do like about this is the fluidity of the mark. I think that's actually more successful, but I do like this dome, geometric kind of domey thing, and also I find this quite precarious, shelf bench kind of quite interesting as well. So what I decided to do was to do a series of larger works specifically connected to that one artifact by Tillman Reimenschneider. And I kind of started to work on the repeated mark in oil. And then this kind of shallow white layering came around the edge, which I find quite interesting. Also, these kind of black mirror forms, these spherical forms became quite interesting. Again, quite an intuitive approach. I think other paintings at the time, I've been using this black sun idea. And it's kind of interesting when I look at this now, because in some ways they look like mirrors. They look like spherical forms that could be hovering around the women. So the women could be looking in, but away from each other, or through a window to looking at each other. So I kind of like, there's this kind of circular form that's going on there, which I find interesting. Another paperwork brings these forms into a landscape. Again, very intuitively kind of made within the studio. You're just working on lots of sheets of paper, things happen, and you kind of go with it. But I kind of shrouded, what you've seen before was a black mark making, and then I shrouded it in this white. And I'm using the word shroud, you know, purposely. I didn't think about it, but it kind of got the white going. The interesting thing about these works, they become quite muted. The color's kind of gone away. And there's this kind of very vacant landscape, which you can see in one of the smaller works that's in the Gemelden Gallery. And I know this piece. I wasn't deliberately thinking of anything here. I've just brought this up to illustrate it. A lot of these scenes from the Passion and whatever are kind of framed in kind of quite barren landscape, which is quite interesting. But then looking more objectively at this, I kind of started to think of geological maps, and how maybe if this was to emerge into some sort of sculptural form, it could be laid flat. So in effect, these women are interconnected to the landscape in some way. That could be like, wow, that could go on for quite a number of months, if not years, but it's kind of an interesting point that's just cropped up. Yeah. So let's go on. Running along with this, I kind of just carried on with doing more abstract kind of work away from the artifact, not being held to the shape or form of it. So I kind of like these pieces, and I have brought in this small detail of the figure on the left-hand side of the mourning women. I mean, what are these forms? They're quite dark, they're heavy, they're held up by these precarious kind of linear steel-like forms, yeah? Okay, so this is something that I kind of wouldn't mind testing these really large, just to see what happens. And then on a recent visit to the Bode Museum, I started to look at a cross-section of the actual artifact. It's probably about 40 centimeters by 60 centimeters, but the width of this is probably only about 12 to 14 centimeters. So the compression of this is actually really quite dramatic when you look at it from the side. And I kind of, I'm really interested in what's going on in that space. Also, what's going on possibly behind it. The kind of the world, that kind of, what would I say, behind the scenes aspect of it, the fittings, how this thing is going to be hung, the attachments or whatever. And I have been looking at the back of a lot of these altarpieces. They are kind of interesting. I just put a paperwork alongside this that I did make, I think, at the end of last year. And I think what you can see here is mark making and movement, which suggests like a head-like form, but it's layered in such a way. This could be her, this could be folds of cloth or whatever, and this could be flesh. And I kind of think it complements these kind of compressed works. So this is the research. There are many registers to it. I think I'm just showing a fragment of the story that I'm going through at the moment with this research. And I've just brought up some of these references of things that I'm reading at the moment that are of interest. And if anyone wants to call on me to kind of, check on what they are, they can do. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was a really lovely presentation. So I have to say that we prepared this presentation to focus on your most recent projects and your current research that you are developing for GloGower. But as you said, we can find that this is going to take longer research and a lot of time to open new paths, open new ways to investigate in this relationship. I would like to say that I found the presentation really lovely, beautiful, the way that you introduced two concepts that are really important in your practice, and also questioning somehow painting, which I realized lately as a curator that is all the time in some kind of crossing point of questioning in contemporary art. Those concepts were gesture and framing that gesture, which I found really synthetic for the work that you as a painter is doing all the time, you know, like doing that action, but also finding that mark, as you said. So that was really a special part. I took a lot of notes with also your sentences and phrases, but I would like to start this conversation about something that I was intriguing all the time. That was how do you feel more connected, or how do you feel is more important in your practice? Is the action of painting, is the material, or is the creation of that image that we can see as the viewer of the painting? I think this is something that lately for me was interesting question to have with some artists, because they were reflecting about their process, but also the expectations when they showed that piece. So I would like to know your take on that.
It's kind of a really good question. And I mean, I suppose, over the years, what you have to do, you have to actually set the climate right in the studio if you want to deliver a mark. I mean, sometimes it can be incredibly difficult to do that. You know, there's too much going on. I think essentially, it's almost like a kind of, the action itself of making handmade work is kind of a physical thing as well. So there's this kind of interesting thing that's going on. There's, you know, if you want to actually make something on the surface, how do you do it? When I hang it or when I lay it on the floor, they're two different things and two different responses. But initially, I would say to you, I'm trying to tease out some sort of form. I really think that. I mean, you know, the definition of it being abstract work, I can see figurative forms there, and possibly there's a practice, it's a long practice that is supported by a lot of observational drawing. I used to teach life drawing, you know, loved it, absolutely adored it, you know, wakening people up, kind of but I did it in such a way that I would say to students, you've got to rip up the work at the end of this. And they go, well, I says, this has got nothing to do with creating an artwork. It's about the process. But the process in order to get you to arrive there so that you actually have something built into your DNA, really. So that's, but I do think it's connected. It's trying to tease out some sort of form. Yes, you know, locating it as a form. Yeah. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, because I think that is like the good answer, you know, like, of course, it's kind of both, and one weighs more than the other, but I always like the answers. I
like,
think
for instance,
it's an interesting question.
Yeah. No, but for instance, I remember I was doing small works, and there was this kind of mark that kept drawing downwards. You know, it was like, you know, and it was that, you know, it's like, what's the point, you know? I think the freeing up of just using that one mark, I mean, I would like to give it a go just to totally, you know, dive into a pool of total immersion and kind of layer the canvas. And I love looking at painters that just do that they're not kind of creating some shape or, you know, that looks like a bulbous head-like form or whatever, but they're just kind of dealing in mark making. I absolutely adore that. But like, if I look at Cy Twombly or somebody like that, it's not just, it houses meaning. These kind of shifts and turns house a lot of meaning.
Yeah, indeed. Following also with your process and the way you work, we have been seeing in your presentation some serious and quite organized, and you have already a sense of series and collections, let's say. But is this really the way you work? This coherent, this organization, or do you prefer to just keep it fluid, and after you organize that work, you give it the sense for saying somehow?
Well, I always work in series. I mean, when I kind of mentioned about those carrier series, the only thing that I had that was kind of keeping me kind of consistent was the scale. You know, I kind of just thought whatever else is happening on there, at least the scale is the constant. So, I mean, what happens with a series when you're kind of working, there's probably about 2 or 3 elements. Usually I would have, I mean, having 12 is quite a lot, but those 12 will start grouping themselves. They'll start kind of moving into little kind of having just conversations, and they're not on the go all the time. I mean, you'll turn them in the studio because you can't look at all of that. So you kind of try and tease out. I mean, it's wonderful if you can kind of create some collection, you know, that really kind of works from one to the other. I would see them, I mean, what's happening at the moment, it's almost like episodic kind of things. So there might be the same shifts and type of mark making, but yet the form might change. It might be quite different. But if the scale is there, it's kind of allowing the viewer to move from one painting and travel into the next. And there's some sort of storytelling going on there in a way, you know?
I was thinking just about that construction of a narration that we even can find that in your current reference, which is some of the stories of the Passion, you know, like really a structure and kind of iconic, always the same images that we already know, which is the order how to follow. So I think that organization is present in your different projects that you show to us. I was thinking about you are really organized. You're really. I was thinking also about, for example, your.
I like this idea. I'm not really. Well, I kind of have. I have an organized kind of side.
It seems like it, you know. Like I always say that, like, yeah, I'm organized just for my profession, you know, like anything else is organized in my life, but. Listening to you, I was thinking about George Perec when he explained about the challenge of put rules or instructions to the next project, you know, like first to decide how am I gonna, you know, put limitations, and then that is the challenge, that is the creation. Let me connect my computer, please. So that said, I was thinking about talking about the progress and talking about your process of work. Is there something else that you would like to tackle down in your process? For example, when I think about your current research, you wanted. You had a really clear idea about the concepts that you wanted to get closer, and every day you had you were narrowing down this idea of, for example, death, but also mourning, also a clear idea of the passion and the elevation. Is this process of narrowing down also somehow kind of a therapy to confront some of situations in your surroundings? I'm thinking also about a series about Boris Johnson, kind of, it was really funny. I love that series, but also it was some kind of, I need to painting you, you know, like some kind of necessity.
Okay, that's kind of big. I mean, okay, there's probably about two or three kind of things there. I think the Boris Johnson, the wrong trousers, was just, it was the Brexit thing. It was ubiquitous. It was everywhere. You couldn't get away from it, you know. So it was one of those moments. And then when it was him he got elected, it was just like, this is unbelievable. So, I mean, within the other work that I've done, which is, you know, video work and intervention work, I kind of like that idea of playful antagonism. And I kind of managed somehow to bring it over, because he's such a caricature anyway. I managed to kind of bring it over onto the surface because, you know, but it was the mark, it was that green mark that came out. I looked at it and went, that looks like the wrong trousers. And I was probably listening to some podcasts about people going on about Brexit. And then I went, you know, it's the wrong, it's Boris Johnson, and you know, why has he been elected? So, I mean, that's simply how that kind of surfaced, to be honest, you know. But if I kind of look at that series around that time of what was happening, and maybe that exhibition, I mean, that exhibition had a certain kind of positioning itself. The curatorship kind of wanted us to go in that way, but I kind of felt that it would be, I kind of wanted to have this graphic kind of joke, kind of playfulness going on in that series. But I was also picking on up on British culture. You know, The Wrong Trousers is the animation, the wonderful animation by Ardnam, and then the Wallace and Gromit, and then there was this film called My Favourite, and I started to kind of play with that, you know, and brought it into various elements. So I don't know how successful they were. They were kind of figures, they're kind of playful, whatever. You know, I normally wouldn't see the painting as being a response to political events. I don't think it can be in some way. That was just an opportune moment, that kind of a Hogarth moment, you could say, that kind of just happened, you know, and I kind of left it and did it. With kind of dealing with things that are going on in my life, I think the handmade and possibly the slowness of painting, it kind of does allow you, and the dipping in and out of memory from maybe past kind of traumas or whatever, if we're talking about that on a different level. I think it's built for that. I think it's very philosophical, the paintwork, because there is a slowness. It doesn't operate on you know, it's not like you holding a video camera. It operates in a very, very different way. Although I'm sure there are other practitioners there that wouldn't agree with that. So there is a kind of slowness, but also there is an expandedness about it, because when you lay down those marks that are housed with meaning, how those click together, how those jolts and fragments kind of click together to create something, I just find quite fascinating. And it does kind of present atmospheres, it presents kind of things on the surface that people can relate to, I think, you know. I mean, scale, small, large, whatever, you know.
Well, I love this Hogarth moment, as you said, that it can be present in your practice also with this solitude of really long-term research as you are doing now, but also this, for example, when you get to bigger scales, you get another kind of approach, of course, because it's bigger materials, it's bigger, it's other intensity. So yeah, you totally can find this mockery of Hogarth in your Boris Johnson series. I totally recommend people to just go and look for them in your Instagram. Also, I had, like, we wanted to focus this presentation in the paintings and also focus on this kind of 2 years that your work has changed because of the pandemic, of course, has been impacted, but also I wanted to give a moment to think about the other projects that you have been doing during the years, performance, video, how that is something when you started to work with other techniques or other mediums, were you trying to experiment other stuff different to painting, or were something a new tool for you to express yourself?
Yeah, that's kind of a really good question, because I think it was a result of what was going on at the time. I mean, at the time there was the financial crash in 2008, and I kind of started to work, do some video work in 2010. There were things that I just definitely knew that you can't work with painting with this, but I kind of felt really the need that I actually wanted to say something. Again, you know, interventions in this playful, antagonized way. So I was hopping on, you know, those big plastic hoppers, going into ghost estates, which I don't know. I think during the 70s there was a lot of there was some sort of collapse in the financial market of the housing market in Spain. So there was a lot of property just left vacant. So I kind of was entering these spaces, trying to wake them up, but not really understanding, but kind of using this playful, childlike form. And the sound of the hopper against the tarmac was really like some sort of Godzilla, because at one point I had the camera on my shoulder as I was hopping. So the movement of it was like this massive creature entering these really quite extraordinary spaces, you know. So that was the decision there was to, I just thought, no, painting can't do anything here. And I really I need to say something. I need to do something there. So in terms of the reaction to immediate events that take place, I think painting operates outside of that. I think it can't, to some degree, it has to not take a back seat. I think it's there, you know, there's the security of it always being there. And maybe it's not its job. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's where, you know, video works, you know, it's immediate, it clicks into it, and the surface of it translates what it wants to say. In saying that, you know, you have to be good at what you're doing with that. You know, not everybody can kind of, you know, bring that information over. I mean, the one thing about the research that I'm doing with the Glogar, I think it's actually slightly different. Mm-hmm. Because I kind of wanted to frame it in context to the institutions, and in a kind of weird way, it's kind of like a bridge from the performance and the video stuff and the painting. And I kind of like it because I kind of use those spaces in my work anyway. So going there with a certain intent that you want to interrogate particular artifacts, and that's your intention, you know, and allow that process to translate. And I can see it already translating into smaller sculptural forms that could act as props, mm-hmm. beside paintings to almost to promote a reading of what the paintings are about. I kind of like that idea. I mean, that's kind of hovering around the background. I think I've attempted it slightly, but I think this work with you guys during the virtual residency is kind of allowing me that time to really kind of push that out, which is great, you know, kind of exciting to see where it goes, you know.
Yeah, somehow I was thinking about the idea of testimony, you know, with this video, when you are going to these places in this attitude and this with these props for using your work, mm-hmm. and in this relationship with these two collections is, I think it's other rhythm, it's other, it's a more historical work, so you can work in other times, in other rhythms, and that is when painting can have this space for you to take this process again. Mm-hmm. Maybe, as you were saying, in this moment of economic crisis, like everyone's attitude and everyone's sentiment is more superficial, is more sensible, maybe. So you need like this action of the now and even the action of the performance as you are taking this camera and hopping around. So
I mean, I am interested in the duality of that. You know, why do I want to do that, and why am I continuing with painting and the language of it? I mean, I also think it's a curatorial responsibility to maybe kind of go with an artist. I mean, I think I remember trying to get, I did show those video pieces, but then I tried to get it moved, and I've got the impression that people are box me into the painting, which is fine, you know. I mean, people want to be able to kind of identify you as this kind of thing, you know. But I do think they can coexist, and it would be really interesting to see what way the curatorial, you know, what personality could pick that up and say, hey, I know that you do these things and you also do these things. How can we kind of work with that? How can we kind of present that? You know, I mean, you know, that could be another way of readdressing that they don't have to be, you know, tied to each other. They can coexist in some sort of way. But that's kind of up to you guys, curators. Yeah.
So yeah, I enjoy so much this conversation. We had like a ton of questions more, but I think we made some interesting conversation about your work. Yeah. I'm really happy that you presented your current research. I'm eager to see more during the weekend in the takeover for you to share everything that you have been pointing a little bit. Also, your readings right now are really interesting. So if you could share that,
some of those books I'd really recommend that Griselda Pollock. And if you don't want to buy the book, look at her. She's online. You can look at those lectures online. They're really interesting. So I seriously would recommend it. Okay, thank you so much. I had a great time doing this.
Yeah, me too. So have a lovely evening, everyone. You will find this video in Glow Hour's account, YouTube and Instagram. And I hope people can reach us, Glow Hour or whatever, for more information if you have any question. So let us know. Thank you so much.